This Mardu deck wants to cheat powerful and evasive creatures onto the battlefield through the use of Kaalia's attack trigger or by other effects. Our targets for cheating creatures into play are limited to 3 creature types, as Kaalia's attack trigger allows us to put an angel, demon, or dragon from our hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking whenever Kaalia attacks. This is not a problem for us, as dozens of the most powerful angels, demons, and dragons throughout Magic's history are included in the 99. Many of these creatures have potent enter the battlefield triggers or other abilities that we can replicate. This cheat creatures into play and abuse their triggers dynamic can be devastating to our opponents, particularly if we develop synergy among various recursion and or cheat effects from the 99. If so, then Kaalia can watch comfortably from the command zone as we outvalue our opponents.
Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. Kaalia of the Vast is a 2/2 human cleric with flying for 1 and Mardu colors. Whenever she attacks an opponent, we may put an angel, demon, or dragon creature card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking that opponent. She will have her revenge if she has to call on every force from above and below. And the following are the creatures from whom Kaalia will conjure from above and below, beginning with, and appropriately enough, Kaalia version 2.0, the Zenith Seeker. 3/3 human cleric with flying and vigilance for Mardu colors. Whenever she enters the battlefield, we look at the top 6 cards of our library. We may reveal an angel, demon, and or dragon card from among them and put them into our hand. Then we put the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. So Kaalia 2.0 will help out Kaalia version 1.0 greatly by making sure we have the creatures in our hand necessary to pull off her combat trigger. Next creature up is the Baneslayer Angel, 3 and 2 white for a 5/5. She has flying, first strike, lifelink, protection from demons, and protection from dragons. Staying with the CMC of 5, we continue with Doom Whisperer, a 6/6 nightmare demon with flying and trample. We may pay 2 life to surveil 2. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the surveil mechanic, that means we can look at the top 2 cards of our library, put any number of them into our graveyard, and the rest on the top of our library in any order. It's kind of like an alternative to scrying as opposed to putting them on the bottom of our library. We can put the cards into the graveyard. Doom Whisperer can be very, very helpful in stacking the top of the deck in order to keep creatures in our hand and continue to cheat them out onto the battlefield. Staying with the CMC of 5, we have Karmic Guide, a 3/2 white for a 2/2 Spirit Angel. It does not say Angel on this copy from the Urza block because it was later errated to say Angel Spirit. She's flying, protection from black, and has the Echo mechanic, which means during our next upkeep, after this permanent comes into play under our control, we must pay its casting cost or sacrifice it. And when Karmic Guide ETBs, we choose target creature card in our graveyard and put that creature into play. Because of the importance of the creatures that we're going to be summoning and or cheating onto the battlefield, getting them out of the graveyard will be very important and ensure our win condition, which is combat. Staying with the CMC of 5 and our last CMC 5 creature, this one has no evasion. However, when coupled with Kaalia, it could be an instant win, or at least minimally an instant kill of one of our opponents. And that is Master of Cruelties, 3 in Rakdos colors for a 1/4 first strike with Death Touch. Master of Cruelties cannot attack alone, and whenever Master of Cruelties attacks a player and isn't blocked, that player's life total becomes 1. Master of Cruelties assigns no combat damage this combat. So the combo goes, we attack with Kaalia. Kaalia's attack triggers, and we put Master of Cruelties into play, tapped and attacking. Because it's not declared as an attacker, it skirts around the Master of Cruelties cannot attack alone clause, therefore allowing it to swing in with its damage. And if there is no interaction from our opponent and they have no blockers in front of them, then Master of Cruelties will deal first strike damage, bringing their life total down to 1, and then Kaalia deals 2 points of flying damage, therefore eradicating the opponent. Master of Cruelties is the only creature in the entire deck that does not fly. Moving into a CMC of 6, we have Aurelia the War Leader. 2 red and 2 white for a 3/4 angel with flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever she attacks for the first time each turn, we untap all creatures we control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Unfortunately, this attack trigger will not work when Aurelia is put onto the battlefield for the first time with Kaalia the Vast's attack trigger. She is not being declared as an attacker, so very similar to Master of Cruelties, her additional combat phase trigger will not happen. However, in order to get her onto the battlefield with our various other ways to cheat creatures out into play, having an additional way to turn Kaalia sideways to get yet another demon, angel, or dragon creature out onto the battlefield via an additional combat phase justifies including Aurelia the War Leader. Staying with a CMC of 6, our next card is Demon Lord Belzenlok. 4 and 2 black for a 6/6 flying trample. When it ETBs, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card. Then we put that card into our hand. If the card's converted mana cost is 4 or greater, repeat this process. Demon Lord Belzenlok will deal 1 damage to us for each card we put into our hand this way. You will be mindful of your life total when trying to get Demon Lord Belzenlok onto the battlefield, either with Kaalia or recursion from the graveyard, or some other way to cheat it into play. This is a very high casting cost commander deck, and yes, there are numerous cards with CMC less than 4. However, if you hit a bad string of non-land cards with 4 or greater and your life total is minimal, you may end up killing yourself. But what Demon Lord Belzenlok presents through the risk-reward ratio, its risk is worth it because of the high reward of cards we can get into our hand and utilize to cheat more biggins onto the battlefield. CMC of 6 continues, and this time it is Hellkite Tyrant. 6/5 flying trample for 4 and 2 red. Whenever Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, we gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 20 or more artifacts, we win the game. Admittedly, Hellkite Tyrant's second ability is not the best thing for this deck. We are not an artifact build, and we can't really count on winning the game by having 20 or more artifacts. However, what makes Hellkite Tyrant so appealing to include in the 99 is that if we can get it out early enough with Kaalia's attack trigger, and we can scoop up one of our opponent's mana rocks, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Mana Crypt, that can help to propel us even further into the game and make it almost an inevitability that we outclass and outlast our opponents. So Hellkite Tyrant's presence in the deck is justified by its ability to gank those mana artifacts. Continuing with a CMC of 6, we have Kokusho, the Evening Star, 5/5 flyer for 4 and 2 black. When it's put into the graveyard, or when it dies, each opponent loses 5 life, and we gain life equal to the life loss this way. With so many ways to recur creatures from our graveyard and get it back onto the battlefield, we can consider Kokusho the Evening Star one of our outside alternative win conditions. Next up, still with a CMC of 6, we show Ob-Nixilis Unshackled, a 4/4 demon with flying and trample for 4 and 2 black mana. Whenever an opponent searches their library, that player sacrifices a creature and loses 10 life. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Ob-Nixilis Unshackled. Now, this is an amazing card pretty much because of its high level of versatility. And I will admit, cheating this into play with a fast effect outside of the combat effect that Kaalia provides is a lot more beneficial for catching our opponents off guard, particularly because of the popularity of searching through the library. Once we're able to have a response to one of our opponents doing that via a fetch land or a tutor or anything like that, if we can get Ob Nixilis onto the battlefield in instant speed as a response to that, well, then that player's going to lose 10 life and they're going to sacrifice a creature. Plus, putting a +1/+1 creature whenever another creature dies, pay attention to that text because it is exceedingly important. It says whenever another creature dies. It does not specify that the creature must be ours, and it also does not specify that it has to be a non-token creature. Any creature that hits the yard is going to make Ob Nixilis bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes such a threat to our opponents that we can consider it a win condition. All right, next up, still in CMC 6, we're going to go Ryusei the Falling Star. 5/5 dragon for 5 and a red. When Ryusei dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. The only creature that will be affected by this going to the graveyard on our board would be Master of Cruelty. So this is going to be considered a board wipe in addition to some evasive combat damage. Let's go over here. All right, next up, Sour of Discord, a 6/6 demon for 4 and 2 black. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, choose 2 players. Whenever damage is dealt to one of the chosen players, the other chosen player also loses that much life. This is the ultimate political machination card. You can pick 2 of your opponents. There have been games where I have selected myself as a way in which to dissuade another opponent from attacking me for lethal damage. So Sour of Discord presents a lot of opportunities and alternatives to the board state, particularly depending on how the game is playing out. Next, we have our last 6 CMC card, and it is Yosei the Morning Star. A 5/5 dragon with flying. When it dies, target player skips their next untap step, and we tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. With all of the numerous amounts of recursion we have in our deck, we can consider Yosei a lockdown option and an outside alternative win condition. Moving into CMC of 7, our first creature is Angel of Despair. For 3, 2 white and 2 black, she's a 5/5 flyer, and when she ETBs, we destroy target permanent. Notice that's any permanent. It does not say target non-land permanent. Permanent number 1 that's going to give this deck some trouble could be Maze of Ith. So when Angel of Despair comes into play, let's check to make sure that Maze of Ith is not on the battlefield, and if it isn't, then we pick the next threatening permanent and we send it to the graveyard. All right, next Angel for 7, we have Angel of Serenity, a 5/6 for 4 and 3 white. She flies, and when she ETBs, we may exile up to 3 other target creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyards. When Angel of Serenity leaves the battlefield, we return the exile cards to their owner's hands. More often than not, for the purposes of this deck, the creatures that are targeted are generally our own from our own graveyard, because once Angel of Serenity leaves the battlefield, we get back 3 biggins to our hand to cheat back out onto the battlefield or to use as targets for Kaalia's attack trigger. Next 7 CMC creature is the Balefire Dragon, 5 and 2 red for a 6/6 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. Any time of the game getting this creature in for some combat damage could conceivably wipe out an entire player's army of creatures. And if we get it out early enough before there's any buffering or any other kinds of combat shenanigans like indestructibility or anything like that, Balefire Dragon will be able to clear the path of any opponent that gets in its way. Next dragon for 7, we have Bladewing the Risen, 3, 2 black and 2 red for a 4/4 flyer. When it ETBs, we may return target dragon permanent card from our graveyard to the battlefield. And for every black and red mana we tap, dragon creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Notice that text says the dragon permanent card goes right onto the battlefield and not into our hand. So that could be a very, very sneaky way to get Bladewing out and get another creature from our graveyard, as long as it's a dragon, right onto the battlefield. Flying, pump ability, and recursion, Bladewing the Risen is in this deck based on its high level of versatility. Another dragon with a CMC of 7, we have Drakuseth Maw of Flames, 4 and triple red for a 7/7 flyer. When it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. Now, unfortunately, this is an attack trigger for Drakuseth, so if this is put onto the battlefield with Kaalia, its attack trigger will not trigger. However, what we are putting out onto the battlefield under that scenario is a 7/7 flyer that if we untap, we are going to do some massive damage if we can attack with it on the next turn. All right, sticking with CMC of 7, we're going back to our Angels, and we are going to the showstopper, folks. It is Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, 4 red and 2 white for a 5/5 flyer with first strike. If a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, that source deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. So let's take a moment just to unstock exactly what it is Gisela's bringing to the cabinet. Notice the text. If the source would deal damage to an opponent, the source is not one that we must control. So it is very likely that we put Gisela onto the battlefield and our opponents can deal double damage to each other. For the second wall of text, if a source would deal damage to us or a permanent we control, prevent half that damage rounded up. With Gisela on the battlefield, games don't tend to last very long as there is very little interaction with her presence on the battlefield. All right, our next CMC of 7 is Lord of the Void, a 7/7 demon for 4 and 3 black, and it flies, of course. Whenever Lord of the Void deals combat damage to a player, we exile the top 7 cards of that player's library, then put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield under our control. So the thinning of the deck is nice. I mean, we can't really count on that as a way in which to consider an alternate win condition because it's just 7 cards at a time. However, sneaking a creature onto the battlefield under our control just through Lord of the Void's combat damage trigger, that is an extremely valuable ability. All right, next, CMC 7, we have Overseer of the Damned, a demon for 5/5 with flying for 5 and 2 black mana. When it ETBs, we may destroy target creature. The may clause is sometimes important, particularly if Kaalia is out on the battlefield as the only creature in play. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token tapped. And let's face it, this is going to come down and take out the most dangerous or problematic creature that's on the battlefield under our opponent's side. And when that creature goes, as long as it's a non-token creature, we will create a nice 2/2 chump blocking creature that we can use later on in the game. CMC of 7, next card, it's another demon. It's the Rune-Scarred Demon. It's a 6/6 flyer for 5 and 2 black mana. When it ETBs, we Demonic Tutor. Who wouldn't want a Demonic Tutor on a stick, particularly in this deck with the high amount of recursion we have? It is not inordinately difficult to break this card numerous times in the same game. Next and last CMC 7 card, it is the Thunder Dragon, 5 and 2 red for a 5/5 flyer. When it ETBs, it deals 3 damage to each creature without flying. Again, for the purposes of our deck, this will not affect us at all, except for those potentially chump-blocking zombie tokens that Overseer of the Damned make. However, they're just bystanders in this war. They're just here to watch our guys fly overhead and deliver the fatal damage. All right, we're moving to our 8 CMCs, and we've only got 4 creatures left in this subset of cards. The next creature is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, 5 and triple white for an 8/8 flyer with vigilance. She and other permanents we control are indestructible. I will pause right now and take a nice little side statement to ensure the audience this is not one of those kinds of decks. This is not an Avacyn deck with tons and tons of global destruction, where the only permanents that remain on the battlefield are our own. We enjoy playing the game of Commander. We want our opponents to have a somewhat enjoyable experience, and sometimes it's difficult to do that if we're wiping the board of everything but our own stuff. However, with that in mind, you will see later on in the deck tech that there are a couple of things included in the deck to take advantage of Avacyn's indestructibility. Next CMC creature with 8s, it is the Bogardan Hellkite. For 6 and 2 red, we have a 5/5 flyer with flash. When it ETBs, we spread around 5 points of damage among any number of targets. This is an amazing creature, as you will see later on in the deck tech, to pair with some of our other recursive spells. All right, we're down to our last 2, and they're both demons. The next is Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded. 5 and triple black for an 8/8 flyer with trample. We can pay 2 life and sacrifice another creature to search our library for a card and put that card into our hand. Then we can shuffle our library. So pretty much this is a cross between a vampiric tutor and a demonic tutor on the body of a massive, massive demon. 8/8 flying trample. The versatility of Razaketh the Foul-Blooded makes him a creature that must be included in this type of deck. And the last creature in this subset of cards, it is another demon. It is for 8. It is 5 and 3 black. It is Vilis, Broker of Blood, another 8/8 demon. This one flies, but does not have trample. We can pay a black mana, we can pay 2 life, and target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And whenever we lose life, we draw that many cards. So for the purposes of what Vilis is really going to do for us, we can say, tap a black, pay 2 life, target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn, draw 2 cards. That is going to be an amazing combination for a deck where we want to have many, many creatures in our hand so that we can cheat them out as quickly as possible with Kaalia's attack trigger or with many other effects that we have included in the 99. Now let's talk about some removal and disruption spells as a way in which to advance our game plan and slow down or stunt the game plans of our opponents. And since we're playing whites, we're definitely going to include a couple of the greatest removal spells in the game. The first is Path to Exile. It's just a white mana. It's an instant. We can exile target creature, and its controller searches their library for a basic land and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. Now, it's not always an optimal scenario to gift our opponents with a free basic land. However, as you know as well as I do, sometimes the threat that we're exiling and replacing with a basic land is well worth the exchange. And sometimes we get lucky and the opponent doesn't even have a basic land in their deck. That does happen. And if we're playing with Path to Exile, then you know right after that we're going to show off a copy of Swords to Plowshares. Again, instant speed, 1 white mana, exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Next up, we are going to include the oh-so-versatile Rakdos Charm. For black and red, it's an instant. It's a modal card. Of the following 3 modes, we choose one, and all of them are inordinately relevant to this deck. First, we can exile all cards from target player's graveyard, or we can destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. Now, there are so many ways in which to abuse graveyards in this format. Having a quick charm available to us to choose to exile all of the cards from that player's graveyard, well, that's just star number 1. Next up, destroying a target artifact. There aren't many troublesome or problematic artifacts in this format, are there? Yes, there are. And lastly, for anyone who's playing tribal or massive tokens, having each creature deal a point of damage to its controller, that's a great way to say, maybe you should reconsider tapping Krenko for the 5th time this turn. Yeah, tokens, you better watch out for Rakdos Charm, baby. All right, next removal spell, moving up to a CMC of 3, we have Anguished Unmaking, 1 in Orzhov colors. We exile target non-land permanent, and we lose 3 life. A lot of the times, exchanging 3 life for exiling a troublesome or problematic permanent is well worth the exchange. The next removal spell is definitely not one of the strongest, and I would definitely have anyone out there considering including it in their deck to ask themselves if it's relevant to their play group, because the next removal spell is definitely included due to the high level of, let's just say, Voltron commanders in my own metagame, and that is Crackling Doom. For Mardu colors, which is red, white, and black, at instant speed. This deals 2 damage to each opponent, and each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. In my playgroup, my metagame, Voltron is very, very strong, so having a way in which to interact with their commanders without being able to target them because of having hexproof or shroud or protection or indestructibility, Crackling Doom dances around all of that because of the sacrifice clause. Now, if you are playing in a meta where, Voltron is not a very prevalent feature to your game, then you may consider taking out Crackling Doom for a better removal spell. But for the purposes of this deck in my metagame, that spell is vitally important. Next up, we are playing with a copy of Generous Gift, 2 and a white. Instant speed, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. We care nothing about that token, and we love the fact that at instant speed, we can vindicate something. Next spell, and this was one of the spells that I was considered when we were foreshadowing earlier, talking about Avacyn, Angel of Hope. And that is going to be a copy of Armageddon. 3 and a white at sorcery speed, destroy all lands. Yes, if we can get Kaalia out into play quickly enough, and we can get 1 or 2 biggins out there onto the battlefield, and we are so far ahead of our opponents, we could take the risk of destroying all of the lands, which include our own. Because by doing that, our creatures stick, our opponents have no way to interact with them, and we continue to send Kaalia into combat, cheating big creatures into play, and therefore potentially end up winning the game. However, having Avacyn in play, giving all of our permanents indestructibility, casting Armageddon will incite some moans and some groans, but it's just 1 in the 99. Next card, we have the classic Damnation. 2 and 2 black, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Again, this does have some synergy with Avacyn, but let's be honest, because of the high CMC of our deck, and the way in which Kaalia can be easily dealt with by our opponents, it may be necessary to cast an early to mid-game Damnation as a way in which to reset the board. Another removal spell, this one is still at the 4 CMC, but we're going back to instant speed for Return to Dust. 2 and 2 white, exile target artifact or enchantment. If this spell was cast during our main phase, we may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment instead. Due to the high number of ways that we can cheat our biggins onto the battlefield, it's almost guaranteed that we cast this during our main phase, because let's face it, folks, we're going to have the mana available to us, and exiling 2 artifacts and or enchantments is better than 1. 3 removal spells left, and we're moving to the mass removal, and the next one is going to be a copy of Merciless Eviction. 4 in Orzhov colors at sorcery speed, we simply choose 1. We exile all artifacts, we exile all creatures, we exile all enchantments, or we exile all planeswalkers. Again, the choice will be predominantly made based upon the board state and the decks that you are playing against. Next, CMC of 7, we have Ruinous Ultimatum. 2 red, 3 white, and 2 black. Destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. This is pretty much a complete board wipe. This is not like a Cyclonic Rift, where it's instant speed and the cards are getting bounced back to their opponent's hands. Outside of counter magic, or outside of any kind of protection, all of those permanents are going straight into the graveyards and not back into their hands. And the last removal disruption spell we have has a CMC of 9, but it is one that we will never, ever cast for 9 mana. More than anything else, this spell will generally cost us just 1 red mana, and its name is Blasphemous Act. It costs 8 and a red, but it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. And this deals 13 damage to each creature, meaning outside of having an Avacyn Angel of Hope or any other kind of mass indestructibility, this will wipe out our entire army. However, as you know, as well as I do, sometimes you have to destroy your own army in order to reset the board. Blasphemous Act does that in a fantastic way at the generally low cost of 1 red mana. Our next list of spells are what's referred to as our miscellaneous spells. They are included in the deck as a way in which to continue to strengthen and enhance the theme of the deck, and you'll see some overlapping synergies with a lot of the cards that we've already shown during this deck tech. So let's begin with our first. It's a CMC of 1. It is Phyrexian Reclamation. As an enchantment, it comes down. We can pay 1 and a black mana and pay 2 life to return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Again, this acts as fuel to our Kaalia engine, or it also acts as fuel to a lot of the other ways in which we can cheat big creatures into play, many and all of which you are going to see during this part of the video. Phyrexian Reclamation is card number 1 in our miscellaneous spell pool. Next up, we have Reanimate. That sorcery speed for a black mana. We put target creature from any graveyard into play under our control. We lose life equal to the creature's total casting cost. Now, not to downplay the potential deadly creatures that our opponents may have in their graveyards, more often than not, we are going to be reanimating our own creatures because we have the biggins, they fly, they deal massive amounts of damage, and a lot of them have some very valuable ETB triggers, as we've already seen earlier in this video. Next, in our last CMC of 1, we are going to play with a copy of Reconnaissance. It is 1 white mana for an enchantment. We may pay 0. That's right. We don't even have to use any mana to remove target attacking creature we control from combat and untap it. This, with Kaalia, is absolutely bonkers because you can send Kaalia into combat knowing that an opponent can block it, knowing that an opponent can kill it, just to get its combat trigger to trigger. And then we can use Reconnaissance to remove Kaalia from combat and not have any damage dealt to it. Because as long as we remove it from combat, that creature neither deals nor receives combat damage this turn. So we can perpetually send Kaalia into harm's way, use Reconnaissance to protect her, untap her, get her out of combat, but guess what? Because she turned sideways and was declared as an attacker, she's going to put an angel, demon, or dragon card from our hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, and that's just aces. Reconnaissance is one of the best cards in this deck because it protects the number 1 asset of the deck, which is our general. All right, number 4 of our miscellaneous spells with a CMC of 2 is going to be Blade of Selves. All right, this is an equipment. It costs 2 to cast and 4 to equip. Equipped creature has Myriad, and for anyone who's unfamiliar with Myriad, that means that whenever it attacks, for each opponent other than defending player, we may put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Then we exile the tokens at the end of combat. So let me slow down the machinations in your mind right now because I can already hear the gears turning. This will not work with Kaalia because once we send Kaalia into combat and her attack trigger triggers, then the Myriad trigger triggers. And then the tokens that are coming into play as Kaalia are already tapped and attacking. So they will not allow us to put additional creatures from our hand onto the battlefield. However, if you reflect back on some of the creatures we've already talked about during this deck tech and the high number of really valuable enter the battlefield triggers, death triggers, or combat or damage triggers, and you can see why including an equipment like Blade of Selves, even though it's useless on Kaalia, has so many other fundamentally wonderful and practical applications to the creatures that are residing in the 99. All right, staying with a CMC of 2, we have another charm, and this time it is Boros Charm. For red and white at instant speed, of course, we have another trimodal spell. This deals 4 damage to target player, or permanents we control are indestructible this turn, or target creature gains double strike until end of turn. The first mode is most likely the least popular mode of this spell. 4 damage in Commander to a player. That's just 10% of the starting life total. And although it could knock a player off here and there intermittently, let's be honest, the following 2 modes are much more valuable. Giving all of our permanents indestructibility is extremely valuable, particularly at instant speed. If somebody goes to hit a board wipe, we cast Boros Charm in response, give our stuff indestructibility, and watch everybody else put their cards into the graveyard while ours survive. And lastly, as a wild card, let's not overlook the value of giving a target creature double strike until end of turn. Notice what it doesn't say. The text doesn't say target creature we control gains double strike until end of turn. We can use this to ambush one of our opponents if one of our other opponents are attacking for near lethal damage. Boros Charm is one of the most versatile charms available, and it really does a lot of heavy lifting in this Kaalia deck. Next up, and with little introduction needed with a CMC of 2, we've got Demonic Tutor. 1 and a black at sorcery speed. Search your library for a card and put it into your hand. Best tutor in the game. Demonic Tutor, right there, smack dab off to the center. Sticking with a CMC of 2, we are going to showcase Dragon Tempest. This is an enchantment for 1 and a red mana. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under our control, it gains haste until end of turn. Remember when we're talking about the creatures in the 99? There's only one of them in that massive stack to the left of Kaalia. There's only one of those creatures that does not have flying. In addition, guess who else has flying? As we slowly pull Dragon Tempest down to reveal that, yes, Kaalia of the Vast, our commander, has flying. So getting Dragon Tempest out onto the battlefield gives nearly every creature we have haste. And that is very, very valuable as a way in which to strike in for quick damage as soon as one of our creatures enters the battlefield. And lastly, and a little bit more minimally in this deck because we really are running 3 different tribes, whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons we control. We do have a number of dragons in this deck that could inflict some pinging damage, so although it's not as valuable as the haste enabling, the Dragon Tempest's direct damage could be beneficial for removing some chump blocking mana dorks that could be in our way to our opponent's life total. All right, another spell of CMC2 and another way in which to protect Kaalia. We've got Lightning Greaves. What a great equipment to get in our opening hand. 2 to cast and 0 to equip. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. Turn 1, turn 2, or turn 3 casting of Lightning Greaves, followed by a turn of casting Kaalia, equipping the Lightning Greaves to Kaalia, and we are off and running. Next and last spell with a CMC of 2. And for this deck, this may be, outside of Reconnaissance, this may be the next best card in the 99, and that is Strionic Resonator. It's an artifact for 2. We can pay 2 mana, tap it, and copy target triggered ability we control, and we may choose new targets for the copy. Now keep in mind that it is when, whenever, or at for a triggered ability. So that would be Kaalia. That would be any of our enter the battlefield triggers. That would be any of our death triggers. That will be any of our combat or combat damage triggers. Strionic Resonator helps us to copy any of our desired triggered abilities as long as we've got the mana to do so. Next up, staying with artifacts, but moving to a CMC of 3, we are going to talk about probably the next most valuable card outside of Reconnaissance and outside of Strionic Resonator in the 99, and that's going to be Mimic Vat. It is an artifact for 3 with the imprint mechanic, and whenever a non-token creature dies, we may exile that card, and if we do, we return each other exiled card with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. We can pay 3 mana of any color and tap Mimic Vat to put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of the exiled card. It gains haste, and at the beginning of the next end step, we must exile that creature. Think about the practicality of this card with respect to the creatures we've already showcased in this deck tech. The enter the battlefield triggers, the attack triggers, the death triggers. How would you like to have a Mimic Vat putting into play a copy of Yosei every time we can and just lock down an opponent turn after turn after turn? Mimic Vat can do that. What if we exile Kaalia with Mimic Vat and we can just tap 3 and put a token of her onto the battlefield? We attack with her, we get one of our biggins from our hand, put it onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Mimic Vat does so much heavy lifting, particularly with the high number of triggered abilities that we have in the creatures in the 99, including our commander. Next up, sticking with an artifact theme, but now moving to a CMC of 4, we have Quicksilver Amulet. It costs 4 to cast, it costs 4 to activate, and when we do, we tap it and we put a creature card from our hand right into play. And this is instant speed, so we can end of turn, we can during combat, we can put a creature into play at any time we want with Quicksilver Amulet. It is a great resource to have in this deck, particularly if Kaalia has spent a lot of trips to and from the command zone. Sticking with a CMC of 4, yet another way in which to cheat our biggins into play, we have Sneak Attack. 3 in a red as an enchantment. We may pay a red mana and choose a creature card from our hand and put that creature into play. It has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, we sacrifice the creature. So with the combination of Sneak Attack and, Phyrexian Reclamation, the card that led off this subset of cards during this deck tech, we have a fantastic never-ending loop, without any interaction from our opponents, of course, of putting a creature from our hand into play with Sneak Attack, giving it haste, it dies, it goes to the graveyard, and then we can recur it with Phyrexian Reclamation. Do that over and over again, particularly with the ETB, combat, and death triggers that are just rife all over the creatures in the 99, and we have the way to make a game very, very short. All right, next up, as we near the end of this subset of cards, we've got 2 left. Each of them are sorceries, each of them are black, and each of them have a CMC of 5. The first is Beacon of Unrest, 3 and 2 black. We put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control, and then we shuffle Beacon of Unrest into our library. This is reusable recursion that goes right back into our library each time we cast it. And we don't necessarily have to choose a creature in our graveyard, even though we most likely will, because we're going to have the best creatures during the game. Beacon of Unrest gives us the versatility of choosing our opponent's graveyards as well. Next and last miscellaneous spell for this subset of the deck, it is Living Death, 3 and 2 black. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control. Then we put all creatures exiled this way onto the battlefield. For the purposes of this deck, this card is far superior than Patriarch's Bidding. Patriarch's Bidding does something similar where each player will name a creature type and then return those cards from their graveyard to the battlefield. However, because we're running 3 tribes and they're pretty fairly well represented among the 3, choosing Living Death over Patriarch's Bidding is much more beneficial because we get all of them back, as opposed to having to naming one creature type and only getting a few of them back. This is not a dedicated Angel, Demon, or Dragon deck, so let's get them all back for the same amount of mana and cast Living Death. I will caution the viewing audience, however. Living Death has a way in which to do some unintentionally bad things to us, so just let this be a warning to make sure you are mindful of what's in the graveyard of your opponents. And now we conclude this deck tech with a review of the mana base. We begin with Soul Ring, an artifact that needs very little introduction and even less discussion. Artifact number 2, and perhaps the second best artifact in the format, Arcane Signet, CMC of 2. We tap it for a red, a white, or a black. Next up, we have a Talisman of Conviction, a CMC of 2. We can tap it for a colorless mana, or we can tap it for a red or white mana, and if we choose to do so, it will deal 1 damage to us. Next up, we have the Talisman of Hierarchy, CMC of 2. Tap for a colorless, or tap for a white or a black, and it deals 1 point of damage if we decide to choose the colored mana. And the last mana artifact of this of the 99 is Chromatic Lantern. CMC of 3, it gives lands we control tap, add 1 mana of any color, and we can also tap the Chromatic Lantern to add 1 mana of any color. Next, we have our lands, and you will notice a trend with respect to the lands in this deck. Everything kind of trends to a strengthened black throughout the 99. So, the mana representation of the lands are going to be slanted towards black. With that being said, we're going to start off with 3 basic plains. We're going to start off with 3 basic mountains. And because we are slanting black, we are going to start with 5 basic swamps. So we've got 11 basic lands to begin, 3 of which are plains, 3 of which are mountains, and 5 of which are swamps. Those are the first 11 lands to be included. And now let's get to our non-basic lands. We are going to play with all 3 possible shock lands. We got the Sacred Foundry, the Godless Shrine, and the Blood Crypt. All 3 shock lands are going in because we want to make sure that we can diversify our mana. We want to fix it as best we can so that we can get Kaalia out into play and make sure we can keep casting her and keep casting our other spells, and this is the best way to do so. In addition to the 3 shock lands, we are going to play with all 3 of our fetch lands. We have the Isolated Chapel, the Dragonskull Summit, and the Clifftop Retreat. And of course, they enter the battlefield untapped as long as we control. For this one, of course, it's a plains or a mountain. For the Dragonskull Summit, it's a mountain or a swamp. And of course, for Isolated Chapel, it is a plains or a swamp. All right, next we are going to play with all 3 possible pathways. Now, these don't give us the choice of adding a mana to our mana pool after we get it into play. We have to make that choice before putting it into play. However, it is versatile enough for inclusion in this deck because we are running 3 colors, and it is important to make sure we can hit those 3 different colors as quickly as possible. So, of course, the Needle Verge pathway goes and gives us white on the backside. The Bright Climb pathway gives us black on the backside, and the Blight Step pathway gives us red on the backside. So that's 3 shock lands, that's 3 check lands, and now 3 pathways. Next up, we're going to play with 2 copies of the fan lands. We got Vault of Champions and Spectator Seating. The only reason why Luxury Suite is not included in the 99 at this time is because I don't have a copy of it. Once a copy becomes available, it will find its way into this deck, knocking out an inferior non-basic land. But for the all intents and purposes for right now, we've got 2 of the 3 possible fan lands waiting for the 3rd one to become available. All right, next up, we are going to play with we're going to play with 2 pain lands, Caves of Koilos and Battlefield Forge. Again, we are missing the Rakdos pain land. When or if that becomes available, it will come on and will end up replacing one of the other inferior non-basic lands so that we can have as much mana dispersal as possible. All right, so those are all of the lands that can give us at least 2 colors of mana. Now we're going to showcase a select number of lands that can give us 1 mana of any color we need to cast the spells in our deck. And of course, it's the best land in the format to start things off, Command Tower. 1 mana, it's going to be a white, it's going to be a red, or it's going to be a black. Either way, It's the best land in the format. Next up is a little bit of a stretch, but we're going to try it anyways. It is going to be Exotic Orchard. Now, black is extremely popular in Commander. However, red and white, not so much. So for all intents and purposes, it may be a bit of a stretch to think that we can get our Mardu colors completely from Exotic Orchard, but it's worth a try. I mean, we can put it in there and hopefully something can happen. We're going to need all the mana fixing that we can get. Next up, we're going to play with a copy of Reflecting Pool. This, for all intents and purposes as well, could end up being Command Tower number 2, particularly if we have them both out on the battlefield at the same time. And our last land that can give us 1 mana of the colors we need, that's going to be our Savai Triome. It's a mountain plain swamp. We could cycle it for 3 if needed. It ETB's tapped, but we can tap it for a red, a white, or a black. This is a great land in the beginning of the game, and it's a decent land to draw later in the game too, just because of its cycling ability. All right, next up we are going to look at a slew of lands that do not provide us with any colored mana, but they are definitely going to help synergize what we're trying to accomplish in this deck. So let's get 3 of them out of the way right now and talk about our fetch lands. We're going to play with an Arid Mesa, we're going to play with a Marsh Flats, and we're going to play with a Prismatic Vista. The Arid Mesa will allow us to get a Mountain or Plains card. The Marsh Flats will allow us to get a Plains or a Swamp card, and Prismatic Vista will allow us to get a basic land. So as long as we can tap this, pay 1 life, and sacrifice these, we can almost always fix the lands, or we can almost always fix the colors in our on the battlefield in order to cast the spells that we need to win the game. Also keep in mind, fetch land number 1 choice is most likely Savai Triome, particularly if it's in your opening hand, because that's the 1 land that we can fetch out that can give us 1 mana of any of the colors we need. And that is probably the best land to pick if you have an early fetch land. It might even be the best land to pick if it's a later fetch land as well. All right, next up we're going to talk about a bunch of utility lands, most of which provide colorless mana with some additional little quirks, and some that provide nothing at all. So let's get right to it with Ancient Tomb. It's going to give us 2 colorless mana, but it's going to deal 2 damage to us. It'll help us ramp out our biggins if for some reason we can't get the Kaalia or any of the other cheat our creatures into play spells or effects. After that, we have Command Beacon. It's going to come down and give us a colorless mana. More importantly, however, because Kaalia is going to be such a target amongst our opponents, we can tap and sacrifice Command Beacon to put our commander from our command zone into our hand. And that is a big deal because, as I said, Kaalia can attract a lot of attention and get hated off the board multiple times. It's not inordinately difficult to reconcile casting Kaalia 4 or 5 times in a game. Command Beacon will allow us to get her into our hand and not worry about the commander tax. Next up, we have a Field of Ruin. This is going to give us a colorless mana, but we can also tap it, and sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. And for each player, they get to switch their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. This is only as necessary. We do not want to get into the habit of gifting basic lands to all of our opponents at the table, but sometimes, and we're looking at you, Mazaveth, sometimes we need to get rid of a card in order to make our deck work. Field of Ruin will be that card, will be that answer. All right, next up we have Hall of the Bandit Lord. At ETB's tapped, we can tap it, pay 3 life, and add a colorless mana to our mana pool, and if that mana is spent on a creature spell, that creature gains haste. So that could be Kaalia coming down with haste and attacking right away to get a biggin into play, or it can be one of our biggins getting into play and attacking right away. And if we're looking to destroy it, we might as well look to play with it too. We're going to include a copy of Maze of Ith. Doesn't give us any mana, but we can tap it to untap target attacking creature, and then we can prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. And make no mistake about it, we can use this on Kaalia many, many times, and it can act as another way in which to protect her if we do not have reconnaissance on the battlefield. Next, we have Mirrodin the Moaning Well. It taps for a colorless mana, but we can tap 3 and tap it to sacrifice a creature, and we gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. There are a lot of effects in this deck that cause us to pay life, and having a way in which to recoup some of that life is beneficial, which justifies including Mirrodin the Moaning Well. Plus, it helps us to maybe speed things up with death triggers on some of our creatures. Next up, we have Reliquary Tower, taps for a colorless, but it also gives us no maximum hand size. That is important because, let's face it, if there are any opportunities that we get cards in our hand that are excess of 7, I don't always want to discard cards to my graveyard. I would rather have them in my hand. Reliquary Tower will keep them in there and just gives us more fuel for the Kaalia engine. Next land we have is Slayer's Stronghold, taps for a colorless, but we can pay a red and a white, tap this, and target creature gets +2/+0, gains vigilance and haste until end of turn. So yes, this could be a Kaalia solution, this could be one of our own creatures, but it's important to realize that it says target creature and not target creature we control. So that could be one of our opponent's creatures that could cause some political machinations during a game. 2 lands left, and the next one is Vault of the Archangel. It can tap for a colorless, or we can tap 2 and Orzhov, and tap it to give creatures we control Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Again, the Lifelink is a great way to recoup some of the life lost during the game. And lastly, and maybe one of the most valuable lands in the 99, Volrath's Stronghold. That taps for a colorless mana, but we can pay 1 and a black, tap it, and put target creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. Having that and Sneak Attack in play is a great loop that can really frustrate opponents, particularly if we're bringing back very, very valuable creatures with Enter the Battlefield triggers. And that will do it with this Kaalia EDH deck tech. Let me know your thoughts in the description below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.